1999 The Podcast is a production of the Cage Club Podcast Network. For more podcasts on movies, comics, and all things pop culture, head to cageclub.me. To contact us with questions, comments, or just to say hi, send us an email at 1999@cageclub.me. You can find me on Twitter at probablyrealjb and Joey at soulpopped. And you can follow the show on Twitter at 1999 The Podcast. To support the show, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. The show is written, produced, and edited by us.
That's how it goes in the Wild Wild West. Well, I'm a badass cowboy living in the cowboy days. Wicky, wicky, scratch, yo-yo, bang, bang. Me and Artemis, Light Frog, go save Sam, a high act from the big metal spider. Wicky, 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 fresh cowboy from the west side. Wicky, wicky, scratch, yo-yo, bang, bang. Me and Artemis, Clyde Frog, go save Sam, a frog party, piece of pants, go dancing. Where Muppet-Tumsky.
Hello and welcome to 1999 The Podcast. I'm Joey Lewandowski.
And I'm John Brooks.
And we are here talking about a movie from, you guessed it, 1999. But first, before we get there, John, you have a return of everyone's favorite sub-segment, of everyone's favorite main segment, the intro, 1999 in the News.
Couple important, urgent pieces of 1999 news that we have to get to. So urgent that you won't hear it for 2 weeks. First, you might want to rummage through your change. 1999, Joey, you might remember, was the year that state quarters were introduced by the U.S. Mint.
Ooh, yeah. How many Connecticut trees did you have? I had
a lot, way too many. Because that was first. I think they minted the.
It was definitely one of the first. They did like 5 or 6 a year for like 10 years, something like that. More relevant. Hold on, I will show you. It's not a visual thing for the listener, but all these Fast and Furious cards we bought trying to get a Dominic Toretto, and we got none. We only got one from a past guest of the show, Heather Antos, who gave us hers.
Wow!
But we have opened collectively, like among all the people who saw that movie and all the ones we bought, like 20 packs. But we only have the one individually numbered Dominic Toretto.
Okay. Well, if you happen to get a Georgia quarter from 1999, it could now be worth $10,000.
Why?
Quite the inflation. Quoting from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Georgia quarters from 1999, part of the long-running state quarter series, have several misprinted and stained spots on them, which makes the quarter a hot commodity for coin collectors. 5 types of 1999 Georgia quarter errors could result in your getting some extra cash. However, there's only the one created on experimental planchet could give you a major payday. Back in 1999, just as the state quarters series was starting, the U.S. Mint was also experimenting with a new metal alloy for coins. While this new pale gold alloy was eventually used for the Sacagawea dollar coins, officials tested it on several batches of state quarters. They ultimately decided to stick to the traditional copper-nickel alloy for the quarters, but the experimental batches were released to the public somehow. In addition to the Georgia quarters, the new alloy was used to produce some Delaware quarters, one of which sold in 2007 for $3,450, and some Pennsylvania quarters, one of those sold for $9,775. As for the Georgia quarter, that's worth up to $10,000. Here's what to look for. 1, it was minted in 1999. It has a gold or greenish color, similar to the Sacagawea dollars. It appears thicker than normal quarters. It lacks the copper orange-colored stripe on the edge of the coin, and or it lacks some or all of the edge reading. So go check your quarters, and if you got a 1999 Georgia one, you might be in for some money. So that's cool.
If you had one of those quarters, would you stop doing the podcast, or would you double down and do more of the podcast? Because I know that $10,000 is life changing. You could retire. You could put all $300 to college.
Oh, that's so depressing. Second, the second season of Freeform's anthology series Cruel Summer premiered this month of June. And what do you know, but it is set in the least cruel of all summers, the greatest summer ever, our beloved 1999.
Ooh.
Characters in the show have yet, as of recording time, to openly discuss how great all the movies are, but the soundtrack has already included plenty of 1 Week and Steal My Sunshine. And also, the season's main character, played by Sadie Stanley, looks an awful lot like Julia Stiles in 10 Things I Hate About You. So, keep an eye on that.
Is that a show that you were watching before they pivoted to 1999?
So, the first Cruel Summer, which came out 2 years ago, was set in like 1996, I think.
Is this a show that your daughters can watch, or is this something that you're watching?
Oh no!
Okay.
definitely.
You said it's on a Freeform?
Yeah.
Because Freeform was that
Family
originally
Channel.
back in the day like ABC Family?
Yep.
So it could have been for kids, but you're saying no, definitely not for kids.
Now it's like Disney edgy. But yeah, no, it is not for kids. At all. It is very not for kids. It is sort of elevated teen drama. But it's good. It's a really good show. I mean, it really is like if the movie Cruel Intentions, which one day we will get to, if that was a TV show, that's sort of its vibe. It's very much sort of in that.
Okay.
In that lane. Yeah, but the first season was great. The second season has nothing to do with the first season, but they're using the same basic kind of storytelling perspective. So the way that the story is told is like you get 3 different time periods all kind of interspersed. So the first episode starts with like the first season starts I think in 96, and then you get a bunch of stuff from 6 months after that, then a bunch of stuff from 6 months after that, and like tons of shit has changed, and it goes real dark, and they play around between those 3 time periods, and the second season does the same thing, just a completely different story and totally different characters, but yeah, and like a lot of the 90s stuff is good, but like they also definitely use a lot of slang that was not around in the 90s. They lean heavily on like ride or die, and nobody fucking said ride or die in the 90s. That
came out in 2001 with The Fast and the Furious.
Yeah, and it wasn't even popular until the late 2000s. So it's not
2001 with The Fast and the Furious.
It's not incredibly authentic to the 90s, but like it has enough kind of nods to the nostalgia of the 90s that which is becoming now the thing, I guess. The 80s nostalgia is over, and 90s nostalgia.
We just talked about that a lot on our Go episode.
With us. Indeed we did. Anyway, so that is all of the news from the internet. Except one thing, the day we are recording, this would have been the 24th wedding anniversary of David Arquette and Courtney Cox Arquette. Had those 2 crazy kids. Made it, but they got married on this day that we're recording in 1999.
Well, happy sort of anniversary to them.
Yes, and speaking of David Arquette, and I will have more thoughts about this later that I'll share with you, I have watched the first 3 episodes of Mrs. Davis, and it is fantastic.
Oh, good. Cool. Very cool.
Love it. All right, back to you.
All right, so get ready, because this is a long-ass, overly long intro.
I can't wait.
It's March 27th, 2022. It's Hollywood's biggest night, the 94th Academy Awards. American comedian of note Chris Rock is on stage presenting the award for Best Documentary Feature. After making jokes about Javier Bardem and Penelope Cruz, who will come back up later, Rock turns his aim toward Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head, asking if she was excited for G.I. Jane 2. Her husband, Will Smith, laughed. Chris Rock continued as Will Smith, who was nominated for his role as Richard Williams in the film King Richard, strode on stage and slapped Chris Rock in the face. Will returned to his seat. The audience, both in person and around the world, was shocked and confused, unclear whether or not they just witnessed a bit or an act of violence. "Oh, wow," Rock said. "Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me." A voice from the audience boomed, "Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth." Chris Rock did his best to move on. Later that night, Will won Best Actor and apologized to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences as well as the other nominees, but not to Rock. Later that week, he resigned his Academy membership and was banned from attending Academy events for 10 years. If you want more on this incident, I encourage you to visit the Wikipedia page, which has more than 5,600 words about the incident. Anyway, how do we get here? To September 25th, 1968, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Carolyn Nay Bright, a school board administrator, and Willard Carroll Smith Sr., a U.S. Air Force veteran, gave birth to Willard Carroll Smith II. They raised him in West Philadelphia, a time in his life that was chronicled across 6 seasons, 148 episodes of a documentary television series you can sometimes find still airing today. Now, let's flash forward to the 1990s. Young Willard is approaching 30 years old and at the height of his powers, having come off 4 successful summer blockbusters in a row: Bad Boys in 95, Independence Day in 96, Men in Black in 97, and Enemy of the State in 98, which was released in everyone's favorite summer month, November. Business was booming. Going to see a new Will Smith movie on the 4th of July weekend was becoming an annual tradition, even if that 4th of July sometimes landed in November. Willard was earning $5 million per film, a number that would somehow raise to an eye-popping $100 million from Men in Black 3, and those 4 films alone grossed roughly $1.8 billion worldwide. This brings us to today's film, but more on its troubled backstory in a bit. Starring the aforementioned Will Smith alongside Kevin Kline, Kenneth Branagh, Salma Hayek, Ted Levine of the Fast and the Furious fame, Emmett Walsh, and even Bai Ling. Today we are talking about the 14th highest grossing film of 1999 and the year's entry into the let's see a Will Smith movie on the 4th of July weekend canon, Wild Wild West. John, what is Wild Wild West about?
Ooh, all right, here goes. The year is 1990. No, sorry. The year is 1869, and through a series of unfortunate events, former U.S. Army captain and current cowboy Jim West, played by Will Smith, crosses paths with genius inventor and U.S. Marshal Artemus Gordon, played by Kevin Kline. We learn that all the nation's leading scientists, whatever that meant in 1869, have been kidnapped, presumably by the villainous Dr. Arliss Lovelace, played by Kenneth Branagh, a character who exists somewhere right between a 19th century Bond villain and a 19th century Austin Powers villain. Lovelace, a former Confederate, is like basically every right-wing weirdo on the internet, intent on unlosing the Civil War, and then carving out America for the British, the Spanish, the native people, and then giving himself the flyover states and Seattle, basically. To do this, he will use his big metal spider to force President Ulysses S. Grant, played also by Kevin Kline, because I guess they didn't just save the money on the cast and use all that money on the big metal spider, to surrender the country or something along those lines. Anyway, Grant enlists West and Gordon to join forces and stop Lovelace, but they need to find him first. And to do so, they bring along Rita Escobar, played by Salma Hayek, a burlesque performer whose father is one of the genius scientists kidnapped by Lovelace, who happens to know where and how to find him. Hijinks, trinket fights, and a shocking number of dick jokes ensue until eventually our heroes save the day and literally ride off into the sunset to Will Smith's iconic theme song, The End.
So Wild Wild West had a budget of $170 million, made just $113 million domestically, and a total of $222 worldwide. That budget makes it the most expensive movie from 1999, and one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive, film from Warner Brothers ever. That studio had another movie that came out the year that we haven't yet covered on the show, but we did talk about recently on Too Fast, The Iron Giant. Warner choosing to push Wild Wild West instead of Iron Giant led to controversy, as critics loved that one and hated this. That's made even weirder by the fact that many at WB considered this, being Wild Wild West, the studio's black sheep, and was a project no one wanted to work on or promote. Begrudgingly, according to the internet, they did. Wild Wild West opened on Wednesday, June 30th. Are you ready to celebrate the 24th anniversary? This week, as this episode comes out, is the 24th anniversary of Wild Wild West. Get excited. Get excited. Kicking off the long 4th of July weekend, the same day that the South Park movie opened. It beat South Park, though more on that in a bit, but fell behind American Pie in its second weekend, down to 5th in its third weekend, behind films like Eyes Wide Shut and Lake Placid, and was out of the top 10 in under a month.
Jesus.
One of the main reasons it managed to barely earn back its budget was thanks in large part to South Park, finding itself in theaters alongside 2 R-rated comedies in South Park and American Pie. Many underage moviegoers bought tickets for this film and snuck in to see one of those instead. This happened as the film industry cracked down on selling tickets to R-rated movies of underage kids, as Bill Clinton, president at the time, was doing whatever he could to try to deal with the widespread moral panic following the Columbine school shooting a few months earlier. Anyway, It's probably a good thing that none of those kids actually saw this movie because basically everyone hated it. It has a 16% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 38 on Metacritic, has a 28% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and a C+ cinema score. Will Smith, who, oh yeah, by the way, turned down The Matrix to star in this movie, has said this is the worst movie he's ever made and the worst decision of his career. His mom told him, quote, "You've done better, baby." Smith was embarrassed that the movie grossed $50 million in its opening weekend, eventually apologizing to Robert Conrad, the star of the TV series this movie is loosely based on, telling him that he understood why Conrad turned down a cameo role in the film. By the way, was going to play the president, which is why Kevin Kline did double duty. As a side note, Gilbert Ralston, who created the original series, sued Warner in 1997 over the making of this film. He died in 1999 before the suit was settled, but Warner paid his family somewhere between $600,000 and $1.5 million. It's not just Will Smith and his mom who hated this. Director Barry Sonnenfeld, actors Kevin Kline and Salma Hayek, and many of the staff at Warner outright hate this movie. Hayek thought she was underused. Kline considered himself too good of an actor for the finished product. Kenneth Branagh said his accent in this movie is the worst American accent ever attempted by a Brit. Ted Levine, who grew up on the original series, liked making the movie, but said the script had, quote, no center, which is why he said the movie failed. He also thought Will Smith was miscast. Those who praise the movie often couch their compliments in things like, well, it wasn't as bad as last year's The Avengers, or they pointed out Will Smith's charisma, or Kenneth Branagh's Shakespearean villainy, or the film's irreverence as a reason to see it.
Just real quick, for listeners, I want to be clear. They're not talking about Marvel's The Avengers, but rather a also updated remake of a 1960s television show called The Avengers, starring Ray Fiennes and Uma Thurman.
Where they're trying to control the weather with like science and stuff like that. So not entirely dissimilar from this movie.
That's true. Yeah.
Some reviewer named Emily Blunt of bluntreview.com, a site that no longer exists, said simply, quote, "It was fun."
Is it because she's a movie star now?
I guess so.
Is that why?
Hardly any critic seems to suggest it was actually, a good movie. Once again, I can't find any reviews from our friends at TNT Rough Cut. On the other end of the spectrum, critics like Amy Taubin of The Village Voice weren't nearly as kind, calling it, quote, extremely stupid and incompetent. Steve Rhodes panned the film, asking, quote, Will Smith, what were you thinking? Roger Ebert gave the film 1 star, opening his review by calling it, quote, a comedy dead zone, and describing how you, quote, stare in disbelief as scenes flop and die. He said the movie is, quote, all concept and no content. The elaborate special effects are like watching money burn on screen. You know something's gone wrong when a story is about 2 heroes in the Old West, and the last shot is of a mechanical spider riding off into the sunset. The rest of the review doesn't get much more kind than that. The film dominated the 20th annual Razzie Awards, winning 5 awards, including Worst Picture. Robert Conrad, who played James West in the original series, accepted 3 of these awards in person to express his thoughts on the film before personally delivering these awards to the quote-unquote winners. Let's talk about that spider, though. One of my college roommates was obsessed with Kevin Smith, and he watched those An Evening with Kevin Smith DVDs all the time. On one of those discs, Kevin Smith tells the story about working with producer Jon Peters on a potential 5th Superman film in 1997, starring our podcast network's namesake Nicolas Cage.
Oh.
Smith says Peters had 3 demands. Number 1, Superman doesn't wear the suit. Number 2, Superman doesn't fly. And number 3, he fights a giant spider in the 3rd act. When the production hired Tim Burton, he scrapped Kevin Smith's script and all of Jon Peters' ideas. Fast forward to the release of this movie, Wild Wild West, which is produced by Peters, and everyone learned where that spider wound up. A funny postscript. Author Neil Gaiman said Peters once pitched a film version of The Sandman with, you guessed it, a giant mechanical spider.
What the fuck?
The main issue with this movie seems to be that no one ever really understood what it was meant to be. It faced expensive reshoots in an attempt to add humor, as audiences weren't sure if it was meant to be funny. Those reshoots also added Spike Guy and Knife Guy to the climax, as Will Smith fighting only Loveless's female henchmen made no sense to test audiences either. There are 6 credited screenwriters on this movie, which is never a good sign. The original writers, S.S. Wilson and Brent Maddox, said nearly their entire original version was rewritten without their input. They tried unsuccessfully to get their names removed from the project. As with many films, the version of this movie that we saw was only one of many that existed throughout the years. When Warner first announced production in 1992, Shane Black was set to write a screenplay starring Mel Gibson for Richard Donner to direct. Donner and Gibson on Dancer both dropped out to make Maverick instead.
Yeah, makes sense.
Tom Cruise was attached a couple years later, but dropped out to make Mission Impossible. At least one actor that Mike and I covered on this network made a smart decision about this movie.
Mm-hmm.
George Clooney turned down the role of Gordon because it wasn't the lead. Tim Curry, Johnny Depp, and Matthew McConaughey were all considered at one point or another before it ultimately went to Kevin Kline. The Salma Hayek role of Rita was turned down by both Jennifer Lopez and the aforementioned a long time ago Penelope Cruz. So that brings us to tonight and this version of the movie. John, which brave souls dared watch Wild Wild West for this show?
Well, I hold that. I'll get to that in a second, but I want to talk about Jon Peters for 1 second. So the thing about this movie where I'm like, what the fuck is up with the spiders? This is all sort of, this makes a lot of sense in a perverse way, and it's kind of new information to me. But I remember watching, I watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy with my kids recently, and my least favorite part of that movie, of that trilogy, is also what I'm sure is Peter Jackson's favorite part, which is the Shelob scene in Return of the King, because that's the sort of weird, horrific, grotesque shit that Peter Jackson loves. And I'm just like, all right, man, I get it, the spider thing. I now think I found the second person who that was for. Jon Peters, spider guy.
Dude loves spider. My review on Letterboxd, because like recently someone was talking, because Tom Holland's out there running his mouth about Spider-Man, because there's the Spider-Verse in theaters right now, and they're like, what's your favorite Spider-Man movie? And he's like, it's Spider-Verse. I think it would have been really funny if he's like, this movie. Whoa. My favorite Spider-Man movie is Wild Wild West.
It'd be funny to have Loveless as like one of the alternate Spider-Mans, because he uses that symbol and he has spider shit everywhere, and they never explain why, but we'll talk about that later on. Our guests on today's episode are the hosts of the recently completed and to be continued show right here on the Cage Club Podcast Network, The Monsters That Made Us. We'll talk about the greatest cinematic monster of all time, the giant robot spider. Mike Manzi and Dan Cólon.
I realized after we did the intro that I never actually said, like, and we'll be right back. You want me to say that now?
Sure.
And we'll be right back.
That's great.
Cool. What a good job.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about it.
John, I feel like you have not been less enthusiastic to talk about a movie this entire podcast than you are to talk about Wild Wild West. Like the energy and the pep and the every other synonym for energy in your voice has completely died, I think, both on mic and off mic. And I think we are better for having talked about this movie, especially after that rousing intro segment.
Well, then it's a good thing I'm on this episode. I'll have to do the heavy lifting here, probably.
I did just record an hour and a half of a different podcast. So.
Hey, man, that's not our fault.
And I have to admit, this is a hard movie to get excited about.
So this is exciting for the podcast. For longtime listeners, this is, I believe, one of maybe 3 movies I saw in theaters that year, which is very exciting.
Wow.
I remember for sure back-to-back summers being on vacation around the 4th of July and seeing Independence Day and Men in Black at some, like, not foreign theater, but foreign to me theater, like in Maryland or Massachusetts or something.
Yeah.
If we saw this one, I think it would have been at home, but I don't know. But I feel like I saw it, and then I know I saw it a couple of years ago for How This Get Made, and now I saw it again for this. But I'm excited, especially since one of our guests, I don't know if he likes this movie, although it has 2 near missed connections to shows that he and I did, and then our other guest loves this movie ? So I don't know. Mike, did you know that Tom Cruise, Mike Manzi, Mike, do you know that Tom Cruise was attached to this at one point, and also that Will Smith turned down The Matrix to make this movie?
Yes. I knew about the Matrix thing. I did not know about the Tom Cruise thing. But Joey, do you know about the direct connection to another show we do with Kevin Kline being in a Keanu movie?
I Love You to Death, one of the better Keanu
Very
movies.
good Keanu movie, yeah.
But originally it was going to be a Shane Black movie for Richard Donner, and then Cruise was attached after Mel Gibson was attached, and Cruise was like, no, I'm going to do Mission Impossible instead, which...
Oh. Was it always Kline as Artemis, or did
No, George Clooney turned it down.
Oh, that would have been great.
Johnny Depp was considered. Tim Curry was considered.
Like George Clooney was like in the movie for a few minutes, and then it was like, nah,
I'm not the star. I'm going to get out of here.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad. He kind of looks like Ross Martin, the guy from the TV show, a little bit.
But Dan Cólon,
Hello,
loves
Dan.
this movie? Question mark.
Welcome to the
Yes.
show.
Yes. Now my
There's no Frankenstein. There's no Wolfman, Dan. That's why I hate it.
There's a Frankenstein-ish thing.
That's true. I take it back. I can see now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had to sort of figure out why I love this movie in preparation for this podcast, because I never really thought about it. It's always a movie that I've always loved, despite its reputation, and I understand a lot of people hate it. And I, to be quite honest with you, don't feel like I could really go to bat for it in any meaningful way. You know, my objective here is not to sway the room. I don't have a good defense for it. You know, I don't have a good defense. So it's purely subjective for me. I saw it in the theater as well, Joey. I don't watch it frequently, but every time I do watch it, I just have a really good time watching it. And, you know, I think there was a really good version of this movie early on in pre-production. And I'm sure like everybody probably would have loved that. The cast sounded great. But as it exists, you know, it's one of those things that does so many things strangely. I don't really get a lot of the choices here, but it's sort of a spectacular failure that somehow works for me.
I get the spectacular failure thing. I don't know that this achieves that level. Like I was saying to John after we recorded the intro, and I want to hear both how John and Mike saw this movie for the first time. I don't think there's enough stuff in here to be bad. I think it's just like, we're going to be operatic and bombastic and over the top and basically have no story and no plot.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with that. Okay, so I had no, before today, I had no previous experience with the TV show, right? I had always known that it was an adaptation of a 1960s TV show. And if you look at the 90s, which there were like 10 adaptations of 60s TV shows that became movies. And so that apparently was a thing. So anyway, I watched an episode of the TV show today. It was actually the first episode with Loveless as the villain. And it's very different. But in a lot of ways, I can see how... okay, so they took the gadgets, right? The TV show was sort of pitched as James Bond on a saddle. Those are the exact words of the creator. And so, okay, now we're getting into maybe why I love this movie. It kind of plays like a Roger Moore, James
you
Bond
love horses.
movie.
We get it.
Yeah.
But like, so it had the gadgets. It kind of had a steampunky thing going on. So it didn't come entirely out of left field. And Loveless, his whole thing was like world domination using his wealth to fund, science-y kind of shit.
In fairness, that was also the plot of the first episode, which I watched, which was about a guy who's trying from a Mexican who was trying to take over the world domination.
I think this is the issue. It's that it's the amount of plot for a TV episode spread over 105 minutes, just with a big ass mechanical spider. John, I know this is your favorite movie from 1999, but did you see this in theaters?
I did not see it in theaters.
Really?
I'm pretty sure I did not see it in
Well,
theaters.
you saw South Park this weekend.
Yes.
Or did you not? Yes.
I know, I definitely did. Yeah, for sure.
Wow, that was the same weekend, huh?
Same weekend, 4th of July weekend, baby.
Yeah, Will Smith's weekend. 4th of July.
Oh, you gotta listen to the intro. Talked all about it.
I was scared away by the reviews and by the trailer.
And by the general vibe and aesthetic and
by the
everything.
everything about it, yeah.
I had a friend who's generally I liked his taste, and he liked a lot of like bad movies, but like fun bad movies as well, and he loved it, and I watched it with him on DVD when it came out, and I was like, this is just not good. And yeah, it's not, and I really don't think I've seen it since, except
so you saw it on
through,
DVD like 24 years ago, and basically not since.
yeah, and like, I mean, it's sort of a movie that for a while you could like see through osmosis, you know. It was just sort of like it's still within the, because of the fucking song was within the sort of pop culture like.
And that's Mike and my favorite tradition. Mike coined the term raptor, a rapper turned actor.
Yeah.
But
raptor.
Anytime a movie does the sum up the storyline in a closing rap, it's an all-time classic.
It is. I do though. Like I was looking forward to watching it again because I just kind of, my memory was like it's a
You
mess.
were or you were not looking forward to it?
No, I was.
Yeah.
Because I remember it like I was like it's. I remember it being a mess, but like full of kind of, you know, sort of weird looking special effects and sort of a weird energy, and it actually doesn't have those either. Like I watched it again. And I'm like, oh, this isn't just bad. It's like, it's not just a messy movie. It's a really, like, everything about this movie falls completely flat. Like nothing works.
I think Salma Hayek is charming in it. I think she's okay.
Oh, look, no, okay. So there's some individual elements of it that are good, but like Klein is really, really good. I think actually Branagh is fantastic. Like, having a great time. I love his like ridiculous whatever the hell it is accent and all of that sort of thing. I kind of dug the like artificial aesthetic of it, but like I wanted it to go much harder on that. Like way too much of this movie takes place at night. Way too much of it's on a fucking train. You know, it doesn't have enough of sort of the like weird matte painting-y blue screeny look that's actually kind of cool because it's so artificial. But like it couldn't decide on anything, and there's zero chemistry between Klein and Smith, and that's a big problem. Like they're both awesome, and when they're together there's just nothing happening between the two of them, and it's just, God, it's such a fucking chore. And then Will Smith does the like no more Mr. Knives guy line, and I'm like, I don't want to be here anymore. Like it's been nobody wants this. Like nobody wanted you to say that. You didn't want to say that. We are now at an hour and 40 minutes in, and like this is a fucking disaster.
I do think this is fascinating, you know, Mike, to compare it to Cage Club, where Cage does in a row The Rock, Con Air, and Face Off. You're like, holy shit, he can't miss. And then like he like goes and does different things. But like, imagine if like we did that and then like Face Off was like bad instead of perfect. Like it feels like to do three. I mean, he does Enemy of the State in between these three, but like basically three enormous summer blockbusters in a row, and then the third one just is critically and commercially not up to snuff. Yeah. So like, Mike, did you see this in theaters? When did you first see this, and what is your overall impression of Wicky Wild?
I did not see this in theaters. I
cannot believe that me and Dan are holding it down like that, because I saw basically nothing in theaters that year.
Yeah, I don't know what I was up to. I saw Matrix that year. I can't really remember. I'd have to look at a list, but I was there, you know, the previous 2 years for the 4th of July for Will Smith and all that. I love Independence Day. I love Men in Black.
Yeah.
I love him in those movies. This just feels like a fucking horse by committee. It's just like,
yeah,
you know, that is where it comes down to for me. Like there's something here, but the studio didn't let them do what the movie wants it to do. It just feels forced at every turn for me, and every bad edit, every unclever quip, every terrible action set piece. There is kind of like this magnificent incoherence to it all when you just watch it all at once. And this is, by the way, the first time I've watched it straight through was for this show.
Ever.
I've seen it in bits and pieces. I've seen parts and stuff. I've never watched it in its entirety. Except for tonight. And I was kind of blown away by just how damn 90s it is as far as its look, its message, its racism, it's problems. Like, it is going so hard to please the audience and just kind of like dropping the ball every single time, being like, you like this, right? And it's like, no, not really. And it's like, well, what about this? And it's like, not anymore. It just feels like a movie people have kind of moved on from before it even came out to me. And it sucks because I like Barry Sonnenfeld and I think he's got a great
Yeah,
eye.
we'll talk about Sonnenfeld, I think, in a
Yeah.
bit.
I do wonder how much of what you just said, Mike, like I can see myself as an 11-year-old in the summer of 99, like laughing at a lot of the dumb Will Smith jokes. Cause like I think for most of the 90s, he was my favorite actor. Like I loved his movies and I loved going to see these movies. And like for a long time when we were trying to figure out like what actor to do next, I don't remember if I ever actually said Will Smith, but I was always like, should we do Will Smith? And I'm like, I don't know, it'd be interesting. Cause I feel like there's like the spectacular heights, but I feel like it's chaotic, which might have been good. I don't know, but like I loved him, and I can see myself cracking up as a kid at a lot of these jokes that like this weekend I was just like, oh no.
Yeah, I think it's mismarketed too because like it's very childish in its nature. You know, it feels like what Transformers feels like nowadays, which is just like toys or toyetic kind of stuff. Like, oh, like buy the Jim West doll and have his train turn into like a plane, or like eject the gyroscope from it, or whatever. And it just looks like like a toy commercial to me these days. And that and like it's not a children's film. Like there's a lot of
Oh no.
latent sexuality in this. There's a lot of like eroticism. There's a lot of that kind of stuff going. You know, there's one guy who like remarks about having no dick. Like it's really fucked up at times to be like, this was for children, or at least like family 4-quadrant. And that is just how it feels. Like they're like jamming all 4 quadrants into this thing, and there's just not enough room for it.
I picked this. So like, this is our third season, John, fourth season.
Yeah.
It's our fourth season of the show. And this season we're each picking 4 movies that we want to talk about that we haven't talked about yet. And I picked this one, I think John, like basically for the same reason you did. Cause I'm like, I don't really remember it fully. And I think it's important to the story of 1999. I think it's one of the more important ones that we probably have not covered yet. It is the most expensive movie that was produced that year.
Mind blowing. Yep.
Okay.
It's also the big 4th of July, and we're, you know, this episode, you know, coincidentally, or maybe not, I don't know how John did it. I don't know how his madman master scheduling plan worked, but like it's basically releasing the week that, like, you know, the anniversary of the week it came out. And I was hoping it would be good. And then, you know, when I saw Dan gave it 5 stars in Letterboxd, I'm like, maybe it is like so bad it's good, or so fun it's good, or maybe it's like worthy of a critical reevaluation. And then like opening with the sex scene in the water tower.
Yeah.
And like, it's the PG-13 nudity where like you can almost see nudity, but you can't really. I'm just like, wait, because you're right, Mike. It's childish, but it's also like titillating in a way. And I'm like, who is it for?
Yeah, like are the censors awake? Like who's giving these notes? And that is a disturbing scene because he's like hiding out in the water tower, like bathing in it while like the town's drinking from it. I mean, that's where my mind's going nowadays, and it's just like all gross. But you know, before we go too far into like, I just want to mention the one thing I do love actually about this movie, because I think it's the only steampunk movie in existence, which is a damn shame. And I think they actually incorporate that and pull that shit off like to an entertaining degree. I wish it was better, but I do like that. So I just wanted to get that out of the way.
It might be the highest profile steampunk movie. It's not the only steampunk movie, but like, yeah, in terms of like as the Western steampunk thing, it sort of tried. I want to get to Dan in a second because I want some more defense of like why anybody would give this movie any stars. Here's the thing, right? So we talked about the dick jokes, and there's a lot of them, and I'm thinking about the whole original series is like James Bond in the West or whatever. And there's clearly someone who wrote this movie of like 9 different writers who was
there
like
6. Let's not exaggerate. There were 6 writers.
Fine. Let's do Austin Powers in the West. And there's like, oh yeah, it's like a Western Austin Powers because look at all the phallic symbols and dick jokes and all that sort of thing. And then it's like someone else is like, no, it's more of a Will Smith, like edgy, The Fresh Prince, but in the desert in, you know, the 19th century kind of a movie. And so there's like a whole movie buried in there that's that. And then there's a scene where it's like, let's make a lynching joke and have this go on for 5 minutes. And I'm like, what the like who? What the fuck?
Well, so I think what's interesting. So obviously Robert Conrad is white, right?
I agree.
Yeah. It's interesting. So there's a book called Memory that is becoming a movie called The Actor. And in the novel, it's a white dude who loses his memory in 1950s Ohio. Okay. And originally cast was Ryan Gosling. And you're like, oh, this is kind of perfect. Like, he's kind of like the bumbling detective or you know what? He played like in The Nice Guys. He can kind of play that kind of thing pretty well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we did it for Lottery Pod. I think the episode's out by now. Between the time that we like picked the book and or you know first heard about it, whatever, and now they recast it as Andre Holland. And so a black man in 1950s Ohio as an outsider to a town with no memory is a wildly different story than a white guy stumbling into town. And I feel like that's the thing here. Like, I get why you cast Will Smith.
Yeah.
And I get that you need to address race.
Yeah.
But also, like, that's not the movie they're making.
Yeah, and also just from the one episode I watched, which the first episode that aired, which by the way, Tan, there's an actor from Batman 66 in that episode.
Batman Pod.
It's that there, James West is a completely different character too. He's not a cocky, arrogant, cocksure asshole. Like, he's an undercover agent. Like, he is a Secret Service agent. Like, he is on mission secretly. Like, he is not flashing his shit around, you know. And Artemis is this guy. He's like Q. He like shows up throughout the episode, like feeding him tips, like as a master of disguise, dressed as like whoever, you know, is just like not just women. Like, Kevin Kline's Artemis only dresses up as women.
Well, and the president. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, who he also plays, right?
Yes. Because
Terrible.
Robert Conrad turned down the cameo to play the president because he's like, fuck this movie.
Good for him. So like that, if you knew the show, it doesn't really help all that much. Like, I could see like parents who were kids watching the show, bringing their kids, being like, well, we're getting two totally different things out of this. This isn't Wild Wild West I remember.
So, okay.
Please.
Yeah.
Go.
Yes. Help us.
This is where me being, as Joey knows, I'm a huge James Bond fan. I think this is where this helps me a little bit. I hadn't watched this movie in 7 years, and I don't remember putting those pieces together in 2016. That this is a James Bond movie in the West, you know. And I'm watching it, and I'm writing these notes, and then I looked up the TV show like on Wikipedia just to see, you know, what that whole deal was. Then I watched an episode, but it turns out that the whole James Bond thing was intentional. Okay, so I think that
because it's a good premise. It's a good premise.
Yeah,
and a lot of the beats to this movie specifically, play like a 1970s James Bond movie. From like the cold open, I could see James in, you know, a water tower with a woman, and then there's a whole scene. You know what I mean? Like that's
absolutely
like it has the bones of a classic James Bond cold open, and then it cuts right into the credits. He's like you said, this James West is not James Bond, or this Jim West is not James Bond. This is a very different take on the character, and this Artemis is very different. So I'd have no defense for that. But I think that one of the things I like most about this movie is that it does embrace that sort of 70s Bond camp with the gadgets, the ridiculous one-liner jokes, which, you know, your mileage may vary as far as whether or not you think it's funny. I don't know, man. That's kind of where it gets me. I don't like.
I can feel that. I feel you, Dan.
You know what I mean?
I also
totally
love
understand.
Bond.
Yeah.
I love the Roger Moore stuff as much as the Connery, as much as everybody else. You know, they all have their vibes to it. And after, you know, discovering that, or like bringing that into the discussion, like, you know, having that context, gives this movie more like slack. You know what I'm saying? Like, I cut it a little more slack, and I see what it wants to be doing more than just looking at it being like, what the fuck is happening? But like knowing that it's being hung on the, you know, on top of something else, you know, it's got the hanger of a James Bond movie under it. Like, I'm kind of like not on its side or anything, but like I can now kind of rewatch it, I think, with a different view and maybe enjoy it for a little more for what it is, as opposed to what I want it to be.
Well, I think what's weird to me on the Bond thing, and then I will cede the floor once again to the Bond expert, because I am not. I've seen every Bond movie. I also just saw Danger Diabolic, which I liked more than most Bond movies. I think what's weird is that you have both, like, the good guy and the bad guy are both like mad scientists. It's just like, that's a weird kind of duo. It's like one guy's making like Leonardo da Vinci kind of like practical stuff, and the other guy's like steampunky. It's like, it's weird to have on both sides of things.
Let's be honest. The bad guy is himself not an inventor. He's outsourcing all of that work. He's got a lot of money,
but he still like wants to be, though. Like, that's like what he's like. He's
sure.
He's got like
it's
crazy
keeping
ideas.
him alive. Yeah, his like steampunk wheelchair that breathes for him. You know, it's like all that kind of thing.
But I mean, like every classic Bond villain who was like a millionaire was just paying for all the weird shit that they had.
Sure.
Same as Loveless. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I view it. And then Bond had his Q, just as Jim West here has his Artemis. Look, I can't defend Will Smith here. This is 90s Will Smith doing what he did at that time.
Yeah.
He's not playing Jim West. He's being Will Smith in the 90s. So, you know, that either works for you. It doesn't. Like you, Joey, I fucking loved Will Smith in the 90s. So to this day, it still kind of works for me. I still see Fresh Prince in there, and I just get excited about it. As for the rest of the cast, I was thinking about this too. The rest of this cast is amazing. Like, so whatever flaws the script has, I feel like these actors are really elevating this material as much as it can be elevated. You know what I mean? Oh, sure. I love Kenneth Branagh. I can't tell you how many times I've thought about doing a Kenneth Branagh podcast with Tobin Addington.
I did think of your specific interactions with him on Twitter when I saw his facial hair for the first time. I'm like, I know why Dan likes this movie.
Yeah. Yes.
Get it?
Like, I could do a total Kenneth Branagh podcast just to talk about his facial hair. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think the rest of this, I mean, Ted Levine is in this.
Yeah, Fast and Furious' own.
I don't know how they landed all of these actors for this movie.
Money.
Sure.
Well, and I mean, like, it's great to see
billions of dollars making the movie. That's why.
And it's great to, it's great to see Emmett Walsh. You know,
yes.
Yeah.
It's like, I know that guy from everything, right? So, but that's not like getting, it's not like, oh, Kevin Kline, oh, Emmett Walsh or anything. It's just like, it's got good character actors. It's got good talent in it. I think you're right, Dan. It's the best version of itself it's the releasable version is how like it kind of feels.
I do think a lot of this, to answer your other question other than just money, and I think this is something that I did not mention in my intro that I know that John and I talked about between the intro and this, is this a Barry Sonnenfeld film, right? Like, he had done Get Shorty, he had done Men in Black, he had done the Addams Family, and I think people probably wanted to work with him, right? Like, John, like, that's like, there's cachet there, right, John?
Oh, for sure. And I think this was basically a spiritual Men in Black 2. I mean, like,
sure.
And it would have worked had it gone that direction. I mean, the thing is, like, it's not just to me that the movie is bad that makes me, like, not even like angry, but like sad about it.
You seem sad.
A lot of the stuff that you're saying, I know what, like, this shouldn't have been hard. This is a great premise. You have everything there. This should all work. And yet, what you are watching is a movie constantly unable to like get itself started and decide what the fuck it wants to be about. And then it's like kind of like XXX. It's like you're 3/4 of the way and they're like, oh wait, a plot. This should be about something. And then you're like, okay, whatever. It's like nobody here at all agrees on a vision. And the thing about Men in Black is that Men in Black is the opposite of that. Men in Black is like endlessly creative. It has an idea. It has a shtick. It has a vision. It's playing on this sort of like very 90s alien, mystique and a lot of the like motifs around it, and doing something interesting and clever and funny. And the chemistry between Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones is great. Everything that Men in Black is this movie should have been, and it feels like it wants to be Men in Black all the time and fails every fucking second. The movie that this could have been, I really want to see. Like, that's what makes me so mad about this movie. I'm like, oh man, I want to see the good movie here, because there definitely is one. It should not have been fucking hard. And I don't understand, given everything and everybody involved, I don't understand how this happened. Right?
There's not a doubt in my mind that the version of this movie, written by Shane Black, directed by Richard Donner, is awesome.
Yeah,
you know what
amazing.
I mean?
Is Maverick good? I mean,
Maverick's
didn't write Maverick.
Maverick's awesome. Maverick is a great fucking movie.
Okay.
But you know what ain't so good is like Cowboys versus Aliens and Army
but
Hammer Lone Ranger. And it's just
But Cowboys versus Aliens is better than this.
Yes, but it's in that same vein where it's in the same vein to me, where it's just like,
talk about Bond.
It's too complex. Like, what's great about Westerns, if you're going to do a Western, they're so simple. Just keep it simple, and they're character driven. Like, you know, and they're not Men in Black. You can't really translate it successfully, in my opinion. I mean, if you try, and this is what happens, but like, there's no, like, the fantastical element here is a little too like believable to be Men in Black, in my opinion, you know? So like, you have to rely more on Western tropes than it being a comedy or like a sci-fi film or any of those things. And I feel like they're just like, well, just looks like a Western, but everything else about this movie is like whatever we want it to be. And I feel like that they forgot about that, and that's sort of like the core of what it's called, the Wild Wild West, and it feels like it could take place on the moon for all I care.
That's a really great point. Yeah,
on the episode of Fast 10 that we just recorded with Montez, past cast of this show, beloved icon of the network, Jessica Collins, aka Montez, we were talking about like how to make the Fast and Furious into other genres, like basically like the game that you and I have played for Cage Club. Like, could we make Fast and Furious a horror movie? Like, who would be the killers? Obviously, Han and Giselle doing a Scream thing. Duh. We also talked about making it a musical, but I think there is something to like making it a Western. And I think like having like seeing the nitro in here, like the old timey Nas, I was like, I want an old timey Western with like Dom racing horses and stuff. Like, there's things, and I feel like that's, I was seeing like modern day things in where they were trying to make Westerns. And I think that's to your point. It's just like, there's not enough Westerns in your Western. It's like you're seeing other things that you want to turn into a Western, but there's just like a bunch of different genres and mishmash of other stuff. And it's like, I don't know what it's trying to be.
And it's just off-putting. Like John, you mentioned how often it just can't kickstart itself. Like, it just keeps stalling. It opens with a decapitation. Like, what the fuck is this? And then it moves to that gross sex scene. Like, what is that? So like, immediately the rhythm, I'm put off by a lot of what's happening from the jump.
Yeah.
Joey, I see what you're saying about it. You know, you're right in that it doesn't really embrace being a Western. You know, one of the notes I wrote down while I was watching is that like it was bringing back the same or similar feelings to me that I have watching Back to the Future Part 3, which combines Western with science fiction. Mike and I spoke about that on Third Time's a Charm, and I really love Back to the Future Part 3.
Oh, me too.
Because of the way that it is shot and feels like a Western in ways that this movie does not. I do agree with you guys there in that like it doesn't really embrace being a Western. It is a modern day comedy set in the Old West. So they look like they're in the West. There's Western settings and everything, but it's not shot like a Western. It doesn't sound like one. So I definitely feel that. But
what's also great about Back to the Future 3 is that it's about the characters. Like, there's hardly any time machine or any of that shit. And then it's like, oh shit, we got to go like into the time machine and finish the movie.
Like, or why it's divisive, even though it's the best Back to the Future movie. But no, to that point though, Dan, this is something that I completely forgot while I was. Like, this is another one of those things where I'm like, how did this happen? When I was watching the credits and I'm like, music by Elmer Bernstein. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? You got Elmer Bernstein to write the fucking music for this movie? And it's still like one of the most iconic, like Western, composers in history, one of the most iconic film composers in history, but like, famous for his great Western themes. Magnificent Seven. Like, it's what the fuck? Like, why is he doing this? And if you're not gonna really go in on the Western thing, like, it's just part of that. Like, there's a bunch of different people who are very enthusiastic about making very different movies.
I also
right?
do think, to the steampunk thing that Mike brought up at the beginning, I think if you go like alternate reality Western, like where like Ted Levine with his old timey hearing aid that he has to drain, which is disgusting. Like if you like did a bunch of like stuff like that, I think it could have been at least like a
weirder
choice.
shit. Like that's for Sonnenfeld too, right? That's
like find out that Lovelace's, you know, his hit girls are like fembots, you know, that kind of shit.
So Mike, there's a thing that I found in the intro, and then we can go to Dan because I know he has something to say. But the original end of this movie had Will Smith just fighting the women, and that's audiences are like,
"Oh, great idea!
Why is that?" And so that's why they added Knife Guy and whatever guy.
I liked how in this movie he got slapped.
It's just like Alien vs Predator. Whoever wins, we lose.
What a great idea! What a great idea! Yes, what a oh boy.
Dan, what do you want to say, Dan?
I had a point and I lost it. It's okay.
I got one quick.
Kind of like the movie. Go ahead.
Hey.
Quickly about the music though, like they should have gone full Marie Antoinette with this shit. Like they should have just like done like that Heath Ledger night movie where he was a jouster, and they
use
just
pop music.
Knight's Tale. Yeah, use pop music.
Well,
like that would have fit the mood so much more.
I didn't remember when his I thought his song was going to come in during like the opening credits.
Yeah,
right? And like I think if you do that, then like to that point you could do whatever you want. But instead, they just save it for the closing credits, where it's like, okay, so it's still like Oscar nominatable, but.
That was a very 90s thing too, though, is like your iconic song was over the closing credits. And so almost like the stinger thing at the end of a credits sequence today. Like we expect that.
Informal poll here. Do we like this song or Deeper Bluer more?
Oh, Deeper Bluer.
Deep. My head is like a shark's fin from Deep Blue Sea.
Hell yeah.
Oh, that's way better. And also, it's just a shame what he did to Stevie Wonder's original song.
I am biased here because Wild Wild West is among my most performed karaoke songs.
Look, it's not a bad song. It's not bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure if Miami was on the list, that'd be one of my.
In fact, there was a time I was in Chinatown in Philly one night with some people, and a friend of mine came up to me and was like, "So there's somebody in our group who wants to do Wild Wild West, but they only want to do the Cisco part." And I told them that you know the rest of it, and I was like, "All right, sure, let's do it." And then when it was our turn to go up, that person had fucked off, and it was left to me to do the whole thing by myself. So that happened.
It's better than the Men in Black song.
And it was in like Chinatown at like a karaoke bar, and nobody was really into it. So I just had to do it to do it.
I think the issue with the Men in Black song is there's not enough energy. Like there's energy to this song, right? Like
absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know.
This is not a show like we dislike dumping on movies. Like it's not what we want to do.
I'm not dumb. I don't think this is a bad movie. I think it's boring.
I agree.
I wish that it was better or worse, and I was bummed that like it landed in this middle ground.
Exactly,
because I had high hopes
because on a fucking train. That's
as I was saying, I love Will Smith, and this is the only movie he made this year, and like this is the only iteration that we have in this podcast of talking about a Will Smith movie. And I don't know unless we do something for Too Fast, which I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we could figure something. We had your friend Brian Silliman, who was in Men in Black International. We've had him on that podcast and this podcast. He drove around Valkyrie around New York City in a taxi cab. So like we're kind of close to Will Smith in that way. Like
not really, but yeah,
I know, somewhat. Shut up. But like I don't know, man. Like I just wanted this to be. Like this season is all over the place in a way that was more dramatically tonal shifting than last season, which is just like, hey, guess, pick whatever you want, right? Like this is wildly different. I was kind of just,
Here's the best thing I'll say about this movie, and I'm going to bring up Roger Ebert actually twice because there's something. I know we talked about what's his name, the character Emmett
Walsh.
Emmett Walsh. So he has what he calls the Stanton Walsh rule, which is like if Harry Dean Stanton or Emmett Walsh appear in a movie, it's worth watching. And he's like, this is the first time that rule's been broken. Like he wrote that in his review. Yeah, his review is very scathing. But the other thing I want to say about this is this is like, if there's one thing where I'm not just completely, eviscerating this movie, because again, like there's been a couple movies that we've seen here that we think are terrible. But we've talked about them fairly, and we're not like here to, ruin anybody's favorite movie or whatever. But what I will say is that Roger Ebert used to say, look, if you're gonna remake movies that were good ideas that didn't work, or like just remake bad movies that could have been good. This is a really, really good movie to remake. Try this again. It's not fucking hard. This could be a great movie.
Well,
you could even have Will Smith in it. You could make like a direct sequel to
He
it.
should
Like,
be the bad guy.
Whatever. Like, if you want to tie it to the original, do that. But it should not be hard to make this great, because this could have been really, really, really fucking great.
I think there's one thing in this movie that I think exactly and specifically personifies my sadness with this. Is there is the scene. So you mentioned, John, that this movie opens with the decapitation, and in the middle of this movie, they put the guy's head on a light bulb, right, and they project his final vision onto the wall. And then Will Smith's like, oh, he just needs to put glasses on. He puts the glasses on and fixes the screen. But like, that's in every regard insane and wonderful. Like, I love that.
Yeah.
And then the movie goes nowhere near that ever again. I'm like,
Yes.
I want that movie. I want whatever weird science. Like, I want your Frankenhooker shit in 1999 doing weird science stuff.
Because that's a great concept, because it says that like the weird sciencey ideas of the 19th century are like real, and like and I was like, cool, do that, follow through, make that the rule of this, and it's gonna be great. Never heard from again.
Nope.
It's just spring-loaded chairs and giant fucking spiders, and like
maybe the problem is like, it was a show, it should be a show again. Don't make shows into movies, make movies into shows and expand that. Like, I thought Snowpiercer was a good adaptation. Like, they expanded that in interesting ways, like, I feel like this as a show would probably work nowadays with all the gizmo gadgets and spy stuff like that.
It could. I don't know if it's got the right pedigree to have the right budget to make. I don't know. I think this can work. Like, Maverick works really well as far as that goes. That went from show to movie. The show is great. The movie's fantastic. I have obviously feelings about Mel Gibson. He'll come up in this podcast eventually. We'll have.
Wait, hold on. Is the movie Maverick an adaptation of a TV show?
Yes.
So they went from adapting one thing to adapting another thing.
Correct. And of the same era.
And the original Maverick's in Maverick, if I'm not mistaken.
He is.
Yeah. So like, they got what they wanted to do here, they did there.
It's James Garner? Garner, yes, James Garner. So Maverick was James Garner in the original, and then in the movie you find out that like the Maverick you've been following is like his son. So it's like Maverick Jr., but it's also basically the same premise. It's fun. Like, they work his character into it in a way that sort of builds a bridge to the TV show.
Interesting.
But like, it's a great adaptation of the TV show. It's a great movie. I really love that movie, and I didn't know that there was a direct relationship to this movie being bad and that movie being good, and that those two things are like intertwined. But yeah, it can be done. It's been done. I mean, there's been bad examples and good examples. Like
Mission
the Avengers was terrible, but Mission Impossible.
But like, look, it kind of took like 3 movies. That's the thing. Like, maybe they should have signed a deal where it's like, we're making 3 Wild Wild Wests.
We'll make 7 Wild Wild West over the next 25 years.
Right. Yeah. So that's the model nowadays. If only they had the foresight.
It's either that or a high budget television series. Yeah, and even like, I mean, a movie like Shanghai Noon, which I also love, right? It's like
a lot of fun.
That's a similar kind of concept, and they do it right. It's just not hard. Like, this should not be this hard, and it's so baffling. I mean, Joey, you illuminated some of the very technical reasons why this all went wrong, but like, oof.
The other westerns in the 90s were so damn good. You had like Unforgiven and Tombstone and Wyatt Earp and shit, like these epics and stuff. And so like, maybe for this to come at the end of all that, it's just like,
well, we even did Ravenous. Like, we've done Ravenous for this show, and Ravenous is not a straight up western. It's a western horror movie. Like, so it's not like, but that's really good.
But they weren't. But westerns were not. major audience tentpole movies. The idea of making a $200 million Western starring Will Smith on July 4th as a summer blockbuster. No, like that was not happening in the 90s.
No,
we
but
had some great
I do
Westerns,
think,
but
I
they were
think
they were
there's
sort
a
of pushed
certain
back.
element of like, he can't miss. We
Oh,
can put
sure.
him. We
That
can
was the
put
vibe.
him in any movie,
Sonnenfeld
and
can't
people will
miss.
go see
He
this.
can't
Well,
miss.
then they should have put him in a fucking Ghostbusters movie in 1999. Like, what were
Sure.
they thinking? Like, just take a franchise. At that point, you've built Independence Day. You've built Men in Black. Like, you're crafting all this stuff. Maybe just find something that worked, like, and revive it at that point. Like they're doing with Wild Wild West, but do a movie. Like that. I think he would have fit perfectly into Ghostbusters at the end of the '90s, and it would have been great to do like a a new millennium story around it and everything. They don't even really play with anything time-wise. I mean, they mentioned the Civil War, right? But like, I don't know.
Well,
There's nothing really played with it.
Here's the other thing, though, Mike. Like, and so I'm like, why did this go? Okay, is that you have a black lead actor in a Western, and one of the 6 writers was like, we should talk about that. And there's like 5 lines where he addresses that, and I'm like, well, that could have been an interesting point of the story, but then it's just sort of dropped.
Well, this also said like it exists in a world in which a black man is able to explain to a room full of white Confederates that he was drumming on a woman's breast because that's how they communicate in Africa.
It's honestly the best scene in the movie. Like, it is the best scene in the movie,
cool.
and it's completely fucking. It doesn't belong in any movie.
Thank
ever.
you for explaining that to us. We're all better people.
Yeah, because that scene is trying to like play with stereotypes and racism, and like it's trying to do something, and I'm like, but like, why is it here?
And
this
why is it
very uncomfortable?
And why is it doing that with it? Like, it doesn't need to be Django or anything, like Django Unchained. Like, even that movie isn't like subtle, with any of it. But like, you can have some tact. Like, you don't need to make. I don't need lynching jokes. Like, it's
a very
just
long lynching joke.
a whole sequence. A whole sequence.
Dan, you want to defend any of this?
No, I mean, I did make a note about all of that sort of stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, Mel Brooks already made Blazing Saddles, and this movie is not going to be smarter than Blazing Saddles ever was. So the smartest move probably would have been to avoid any sort of commentary on race relations at all, especially for a summer blockbuster. So yeah, I mean, to go to even venture down that path, probably not a wise decision. I have no defense for it. Like it's not a great decision.
I know that it's, not to, and this is not a question for you specifically, Dan, just for anybody, but like, I know that it's a different time, but there's a lot of cross-dressing in this movie.
Oh, I thought about that while I was watching. Yeah.
Like, I know it's, I don't know that would play today, but like, there's so much of Kevin Kline in women's clothes. And then the climax is like, you're really going to like Will Smith in a dress. What?
I love that if this movie were made today, it would get like boycotted for being woke because the Confederacy got taken down time by 2 drag queens.
Grooming. Yeah, it's grooming and woke. It's the worst of both worlds.
I also do think, and this is no offense to Kevin Kline's looks as a woman, but I like that any man, like specifically Ted Levine, like Salma Hayek is dancing in front of him and he's like, I want to look at that woman. Like, I don't know how any single person, no matter what your sexual orientation is, does not only find themselves interested in the most beautiful woman to have ever lived, as opposed to like anybody else in that room. You know what I mean? Like, he's like, no, I want you, pretty lady. It's like, well, I'm not interested.
Well, they're very racist and he's white. So
he's very white. Yeah. He's like Barry Lyndon powder white. Yeah.
He's like Elvis white when the Colonel finds out.
I guess I think the writer who decided that we should talk about race was like, there's a black man in a movie that takes place in 1869. We can't not talk about, like, you put Will Smith in this movie, we're going to have to talk about this.
Right.
And you could have
fundamentally don't understand like what they're doing. That's the problem.
If it wasn't already crystal clear that they hadn't put a lot of thought into that casting, check out the director commentary with Barry Sonnenfeld. Because I watched about half of it today, and his whole thing was like, "Oh, we're gonna cast Will Smith, and that's gonna tell the audience that this movie's hip."
Yeah.
Well, that's why I brought up
That was the whole thinking behind casting Will Smith, is that it'll be a hip new take on the Wild Wild West.
And I think it's important, like there was like because you have Django, you had movies like Posse in the 90s as well. Like
Will Smith was also supposed to be in Django Unchained. Let's
right,
not forget
right.
that.
And I think there's like something to that to like expand what a Western looks like and the sorts of people who like should be in Westerns. But like, yeah, again, you had an opportunity and just were like, oh no, he's there because it's fucking cool.
So like that's why I brought up like Memory becoming the actor before. Like it's like you're casting a black man in your lead, which is great, and like I commend it, and I think it's awesome. Even if like the whole is like, hey, hello, how do you do, fellow kids? You love Will Smith, come see our movie. But you can't just put him in there and then not comment. Like you're setting this in the world we know to a certain extent, right? Like it's President Grant. Like if you had like a different, like a fictional president or like a black president or like anything that just like, hey, this is like kind of the US, kind of the Civil War, but not really. Like then you can sort of bypass and like give yourself, even though you maybe shouldn't, like a pass on like addressing race, but by being like, this is the 1860s in this country, but also there's a guy with a giant spider, so like don't pay attention to that or whatever. Like you're putting yourself in a position where you have to explain why this guy is not like facing racism by every single person that he encounters.
Mm-hmm. I almost feel like it would have been better if they just hadn't addressed it at all. I don't know that it was entirely necessary. I mean,
well, the Civil War had just ended, so
I think that's I think the
but,
whole...
but the tone of this movie, if they had nailed the right tone, I don't know that they needed to address it at all.
I know what you mean. Yeah,
but because the movie wants to talk about the Confederacy, then they put themselves into a position where okay, well now we gotta.
The main villain is from the Confederacy and he's pissed off they lost. So like that's the problem is that it's just there are inherent in the Western, there are just things that like you have to do and you can't do, or things just won't work or they will work. And like casting Will Smith, I'm sorry, this just isn't gonna work the way it should as if it was cast, someone else. Like you have to address those issues when you cast Will Smith. Like you can't not in any way, and that's why we get these very tasteless versions of it. Maybe it would have been different if it was Denzel. Like who can say? But like maybe then you could actually play it seriously and have the comedy come from sort of the comedy of manners between people interacting with this cowboy as opposed to who they were expecting, and all that going, and not him saying like, oh, you weren't expecting me, you were expecting I was going to open the door for any of that kind of shit. Like you just play it straight, and I think this would have worked, and I think it would have played like more in the way that like Tarantino movies are funny, where he's not making jokes, it's just these people interacting with each other are like crossfiring, and like it's making you kind of laugh because of the way they're interacting with each other, because of these characters, because those characters actually know themselves, and these characters don't really. They feel like they're having like a identity crisis in the middle of this movie, scene to scene sometimes. So,
wow. It's also worth noting that I don't know if Sonnenfeld talks about this in the commentary or anywhere else, but like his career never really recovered from this either. And
he basically only made Men in Black movies from here on out, right?
So he did
make Men in Black 3.
He made so he after this he had a string of like both the Addams Family movies. Addams Family Values got better reviews than Addams Family 1, and then you have Get Shorty and Men in Black. And he's kind of on fire. Then he gets this, and then he makes Big Trouble in 2002 with Tim Allen, and that's not well received. Men in Black 2 is not well received. He makes RV in 2006.
Ooh, Robin Williams.
With Robin Williams, and that's a terrible movie. And then he does some he basically goes to TV, and then he comes back for Men in Black 3, and
he did Pushing Daisies on TV, I think.
He did Pushing Daisies. He directed Schmigadoon. He directed a lot of the Series of Unfortunate Events TV series for Netflix.
So he's like actively doing like semi-prestige TV. Like he's doing
cool
he's
doing fine
streaming TV shows. Okay,
he was like this bankable big movie director, and then this movie happened, and that killed it. But this is also sort of the point where I know it seems early, but like it's kind of the point where like Will Smith's career took a turn. Like the peak of Will Smith's career was really 1995 through 98. Like that's
Yeah.
and you know, he sort of went back and forth with some hits and misses in between, but
You know, like I said, like he
never
made
quite
just
rode as
so
high.
that these guys know, like the 4 movies he made between 95 and 98, Bad Boys, Independence Day, Men in Black, and Enemy of the State, grossed $1.8 billion.
And then right before that, he made 6 Degrees of Separation, which is where everybody was like, "Oh, he can act, and he's really good." And like, yeah,
Yeah. That's where he goes from here, right? Is like Ali and all that kind. He tries to go down that path as much as possible.
Yeah, so he's still sort of like, he still has a lot of goodwill in Hollywood. You know, Ali is obviously a moment. It's sort of a mixed reception of a movie, but he gets nominated for an Oscar for it.
He also does Bagger Vance, which Mike, you and I covered for Charlize.
Bagger Vance is another one of those places where it's like step backwards and
Dead
big,
or Alive.
you know, scar in
Never
his
Decide.
career. That weird M. Night Shyamalan movie with the son. You know, it's
Oh,
all
yeah.
Like, so he goes from Bagger Vance to Ali to Men in Black 2, Bad Boys 2, I, Robot, Shark Tale, Hitch.
Oof,
It's
I
like
Robot.
Pursuit of Happiness. Like
Yeah.
he's still like he's bouncing between like prestige and box office, but none of these are like massive.
He's aging up too. If you look at those movies, like aside from kind of those Men in Black, it seems like he's growing with his audience as opposed to like, you know, he's not making children's films anymore in the vein, or not children's films, but like younger films like Independence Day and Men in Black 1 and things like that anymore.
He's had an interest. I mean, he's never made anything that isn't, if it's bad, interestingly bad, or like, you know, a misfire, like an interesting misfire, or
Wait,
the case of.
You think he has or has not made those?
I don't think he has. Like,
oh no, he has. Collateral Beauty and Winter's Tale.
Okay, Winter's Tale is the one that
Winter's Tale, where spoiler alert, he plays the devil.
But
in one scene.
Now I'm gonna watch it.
Tale, like,
it's not good.
Terrible. But not just a dud, just like an absolutely insane bad kind of movie, right? Like that's what.
Yes, he has Bright on Netflix.
Okay, Bright, and that's like very late in his career.
Collateral Beauty we did for Too Fast because it's a Christmas movie, and Helen Mirren is in it, and it is so specifically weird that one of my favorite Letterboxd lists is the Collateral Beauty cinematic universe, where it's movies like this, where it's like The Book of Henry and Serenity and all these movies that like really fucking swing for the fences and don't connect on anything.
Yeah.
And they are such spectacular failures that I think they're worth examining.
Well, that's what I mean. Is like
I think he's done that.
Movies
I think he's done that, but I don't. But it's why, like, and then also like Gemini Man, like, wasn't like, it's just like, the last 5 or 6 years have not really been kind. Like basically since, but
he won an Oscar within that.
But famously. 7 Pounds is weird. After Earth is weird. Winter's Tale is weird. Focus is weird.
He's never really, from my standards, like I don't feel like he's ever done that thing where he's played like against his type or anything. Like, you know, where he's coming across as like, oh, I don't believe Will Smith. It's like maybe the devil. I don't know. I haven't seen that performance yet, but it's like it seems like he needs to do like the Collateral thing that Tom Cruise did, right? Where he was in the cab with Jamie Foxx the whole time. Like he needs to sort of do like the villain role.
But then he'll also,
aside from just the Oscars,
he'll do a string of those, and then he'll do something where you're like, oh, this is why I like you. Like when he does Aladdin, and I'm like, this is fucking perfect. Like
Aladdin. That scared the shit out of me. Like that was like, whoa, I'm not showing that to my niece and nephew.
But he's so good in that. Like it's perfect. It's a great Will Smith performance. It's like everything that's good about Will Smith is in that movie. And like that, you know, he hasn't forgotten that thing and he still has it. It's a very weird career. It really is.
This is it's kind of making me, and I don't want to because I don't have time, but like I want to sort of like examine his career because I feel like I want to know if he has a second thing, because he kind of does. But like even when he's like being serious, like in 7 Pounds or whatever, or like Pursuit of Happiness, it's like he's still Will Smith but sad.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's
right.
You're still casting him because he's Will Smith, and I feel like, you know, that works and that sometimes doesn't work. And I think that would be a very tiring podcast. But like, Mike, how many times have we like the whole like best archetype for these guys? Like how many times do we see Keanu as like a blank slate, or see, you know, Tom Cruise as like action Cruise? Like there's guys who know what they are good at and they lean into it. And I know that he knows what he's good at, but like
those guys even move out of that lane once in a while. Even Keanu, like, Neon Demon, right? He's
sure.
like frightening in that. It's like I would never imagine Gentle Keanu could be like that menacing, and like we mentioned with Cruise and stuff, like these guys, and even in like Tropic Thunder with Tom Cruise, like these guys play outside of their, you know, yard from time to time, and they knock it out of the park. So it's just like I wish throughout his whole career he didn't play it so safe. And I guess that's what I'm getting at. And
Yeah.
like this feels like someone came to him and was like, sign here for a guaranteed hit. And he was like, all right, I'm Mr. $1 million weekend, whatever. Like,
yeah.
let's go.
Well, I
Another
don't
one.
know. I don't know if like, is Men in Black safe or did he just make it good? You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of thing where I'm not sure.
I don't think Men in
because
Black
like
was safe at all. I think it was a huge gamble, and I think it
yeah,
paid
that's what I
off.
mean. That's I think that like he like things that were like, oh, of course it's gonna work. Like him and Tom, like how could that miss? But like I think in the time you're like, this is weird. You know what I mean?
No,
Like,
but I think at this point where it's like, oh, I remember as a kid, it's like he's Mr. 4th of July weekend by now, and it's like he can't fail, and it's like everything. He's the king of gold and all this shit, and so like King Midas, whatever. He's the, he was the king of
I love
gold.
calling him the King of Gold.
Fresh Prince of Gold.
Yeah, I've always saw Will Smith as a guy who is capable of doing really great work in front of the camera.
Yeah.
When he was announced, or maybe not announced, but when he was supposed to be playing Django in Django Unchained, I thought that's awesome. I really want to see him work with Quentin Tarantino doing this movie. That'll be great for his career. In hindsight, if he did play Django, it's still the hero role. But I think creatively he would have had a little more of a challenge. But you're right. I feel like he's a good actor who maybe lacks ambition to do really challenging work.
I think he doesn't lack ambition. I think he does really challenging work, but he just doesn't know when it's going to be good or when it's going to, like a lot of his choices are really ambitious movies that are bad. And
Sure.
But then you'll get like an I Am Legend every once in a while and you're like, oh, okay. Like,
but the roles to me, as far as I've seen, never like they don't really seem to stretch his range. You know what I mean?
I think a lot of that is racism in Hollywood, to be honest. But like,
could be.
I don't know. I mean, I think he, if you look at the totality of his roles, I think he is a much broader spectrum. I mean, like you look at him going from 6 Degrees of Separation to Bad Boys to Men in Black or to Independence Day. And like I just he does to Ali to like it's pretty wide what he does. I think the problem maybe what you guys are getting at is that there's a little bit of like the Tom Hanks thing with him where like you always know it's Will Smith,
sure,
like, you always know it's Tom Hanks, and like it's not really about range, it's just about the fact that he's not a chameleonic kind of actor who disappears into roles, and so we've always got like Will kind of there, and that's not really his fault. It's just sort of part of his persona.
Yeah,
he's larger than life. Sometimes it's hard to watch those types of actors if you're just not feeling the role that they're playing.
Yeah. But like I think he's great. I mean, I really do. Like I've always thought he was great. It sucks that this movie kind of cost so many people so much. Not so much Kevin Kline or Salma Hayek really, but like, for Sonnenfeld and Smith, like it really does seem to have been a major slap in the face.
In spite of, all the reshoots they did that we talked about in the intro and stuff like that, I think ending the movie where they're bestowed Secret Service agents 1 and 2 is like, this is going to be a franchise. Like you're going to follow these guys around the country doing this kind of stuff. And then people were like, no, thank you.
You know what? Also, they could have easily recast Kevin Kline if he didn't want to be in it and just taken off like a mask and be like, it was a disguise the whole time. Like, no, I'm George Clooney.
It's Tom Cruise.
Right.
It's a Mission Impossible prequel. It's like Ethan Hunt in the 19th century. No, I mean, look, my final thought on this is like, please remake this. Like, this is such a cool concept. There's so much to work with here, and like there was a really good idea for a movie that exists within this movie somewhere that makes it endearing. It makes me want to root for it. It makes me want to like it. It makes me want them to get them the fuck off that fucking train, because I'm just so bored of the goddamn train. But like, please remake this. Please do something with this. somehow. The sky's the limit, but it is a idea that is ripe for something. I think, like, again, getting back to Ebert, like what he said was this movie is all concept, no like core or something like that, right? But like, yeah, concept's great. Work with it. Do something better. There's no reason not to. I will go watch a good version of this for sure.
And we will cover it on the Patreon that does not exist for the sequels to movies from this year.
When we start our Patreon, it will be on there. Yeah.
We'll do a Patreon when the sequel comes out.
All right. Yes. Your move, Hollywood.
Dan, final thoughts on Wild Wild West? We have questions to that.
Look,
are
considering Joey,
specific.
we got the sequel to Election Maid. I think we got some sway here. So anyway,
I did. I called that from the rafters. I'm like, there's a sequel book out. Let's do it. And they're like, you got it.
You got it. We're on it.
Dan, final thoughts about Wicky Wild Wild?
Yeah, so John, I definitely agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think this is ripe for a remake. I think like we talked about, what this movie could have been at the beginning, and I think that would have been a great movie. There's something to this idea that is inherently awesome, and like I can envision sort of like a Man from U.N.C.L.E. as a Western, right? You sort of don't make it such a broad comedy, make it an action movie, but make it a Western. You can still have that odd couple dynamic if you want to do that. I think that works. But I think there's a lot of potential for the property, and unfortunately I think that because of the performance of this movie, no one will want to touch it for another 200 years. But no, this look, I agree with a lot of what you guys are saying. I will never begrudge anybody for feeling the way that you guys do about this movie, but it will always have a special place in my heart. I think. Look, I'm not going to say none of it's nostalgia, right? I think a fair amount of my love for it is probably nostalgia. I saw it when I was like 11. So, like, I don't know. I watched it again. I'm 35 years old. I hadn't watched it again in 7 years. So I still had a good time. Not all the jokes land, but I don't find it to be boring. I enjoy the entire cast. I enjoy watching Kenneth Branagh choose scenery, even when the dialogue is subpar. Yeah. I still have a lot of fun watching this movie for the same reasons I have a lot of fun watching any movie that is bad. I think that for me, this one kind of completes that circle and comes back around to being a lot of fun. So I'm glad I could be the one outlier on this podcast.
Can you rank from favorite to least favorite Independence Day, Men in Black, Wild Wild West?
Yes. So Independence Day I watch every year, so I feel like that has to go at number one.
Hell yeah.
Big year for Coleman.
And from a subjective point of view, I'm going to say I have more fun watching Wild Wild West than Men in Black, but Men in Black is probably the better movie. Like I'm not going to say it's not the better movie. I just have more fun watching Wild Wild West. So I'm going to do ID4, Wild Wild West, Men in Black.
John?
Oh, Independence Day, Men in Black, Wild Wild West. Easy. Yeah.
Mike?
Same. Yeah. ID4, MIB, WWW.
I thought there'd be like more interesting like discussion, but it's like, no, it's pretty clear. Other than in Dan's broken nostalgia brain, it's like, no, there's a very clear, like there's one like really good, really fun movie, one that's pretty good, one that's,
like I don't remember the last time I watched Men in Black.
I want to say, like, I love Men in Black. I think Men in Black is brilliant. Like, I think it's a really, 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 really great movie.
Mike, I think we found someone for your Men in Black 3 episode.
But awesome. Independence Day is just one of the great summer blockbusters ever made. I mean, it's just it is a sort of, it stands alone as sort of
benchmark.
Like it's both like the perfect homage, but also the like paradigm setter of what a great summer blockbuster spectacle can be, and it really hasn't been touched since. I mean, like as far as that goes, it's better than Jurassic Park. I mean, Jurassic Park's a better movie, I think, overall, and like more important. But in terms of like, this is what I want to fucking see in the summertime, Nothing's ever come close to that.
Yeah.
I will also
think
say that Razor Trash did ID4.mp4. I also do want to jokingly rank Independence Day Resurgence, Men in Black 2, hypothetical sequel to Wilder West.
Oh man, the hypothetical sequel to Wild Wild West is number one because I think we need that at some point. And then MIB ID4, they go backwards for me.
All right, Mike, you were saying something, and then I also want to get your final thoughts on this movie.
I could just go right into the final thoughts if you want. I don't remember exactly. I was probably going to tie in. But basically what I was thinking is I'm shocked that this didn't wind up on the Sci-Fi Channel weekly after Xena Warrior Princess or something like that. Like, I'm shocked it didn't become part of the Arrowverse and it was turned into a kid's version, paired with Archie, the crime version of Archie, like Murder Archie. Stuff. Like, I'm just very surprised they didn't keep trying to make this a thing. I mean, for crying out loud, like all the stuff they tried to make things over and over again and run into the ground, this must have come at the worst possible time to fail as hard as it did because the franchise just disappeared forever. I'm with John though, like, this needs to come back. Like, I'm with Dan, like, the premise is the best part of all of this. Like, the original show, I'm going to go back and watch some more. It's on Amazon Prime. If you got it, like they're 44 minutes or something like that, and they're fun. So, it's no Bounty Law, but it's great. So in retrospect, I guess, like, with all the Bond stuff, I'm not against rewatching this at some point, because of how batshit crazy it is, and I would look more towards like a Roger Moore sort of vibe while watching it, but like I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. It was pretty shocking, all in all, and yeah, it's I don't know. I think it's just a product of its time in a lot of ways, in the sense of how movies were made. Like, this isn't the only casualty of the studio system in the 90s. Like, there were a ton of movies that fell flat like this to me, or that were like taken away from their creators, or there's all kinds of corporate bullshit involved, being toyetic and crap like that. So I don't like blame the movie at all for what happened to it and for what it is. And it's just, this is the version that they could release, and it just feels like there's a better movie in there, and it's unfortunate. So like, I'm on the team of the remake, and it was wild west. Wiki.
John, is this the biggest financial flop of 99?
No, I don't think so. Because it almost made its budget back.
Well,
right?
it did overseas, but like, it was so expensive. I'm trying to find. There's not like I can't easily find a list of movies that like.
Well, Fight Club lost a ton of money, so that's probably it.
It's crazy rewatching Fight Club. It looks so expensive. Like, there's so many digital effects and crazy, awesome camera moves, but at least the money is on screen if you watch it.
Well, but the Fight Club budget 63 made 100 worldwide. So like, that's still even somehow, I don't know. None of it really makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have a couple questions that we end every episode with. You guys are our first time guests, so you have the first round of questions. Dan, we'll go to you first. Do you have a favorite movie from the year 1999? Did Nora Ephron make a movie in 1999?
I don't know. I haven't gotten that far on the podcast yet.
No, Runaway Bride and Notting Hill, and neither of them were Nora Ephron, but close, like Nora Ephron adjacent-ish.
99. I want to say... man. Magnolia was 99.
Mm-hmm.
Sure was.
And Eyes Wide Shut was 99.
Sure was. First season. Yep.
So,
also both Tom Cruise movies.
Yeah. It's
Just
going
like
to be
this almost was.
It's going to be one of those two. I'd be real hard pressed to choose one. Do I have to pick one?
Yes.
Yeah, you don't have to do anything,
No,
but
he has to.
Okay, yeah, you do. You have to. I'm about to leave.
Okay. If I have to choose one, I'm going to go Magnolia.
Okay.
Good.
Wow. You didn't pick The World Is Not Enough? You James Bond fan, do you?
Twine.
Look, I had to pick my favorite movie from 1999. I didn't
know,
say I don't
gosh.
like The World Is Not Enough. The only Bond movie I truly despise is Die Another Day.
That's a good one to despise. That's good.
It's the only one that when I do my watch, like when I watch the whole franchise, it's the only one I don't look forward to.
Mike, same question.
Yes. Wow, this is some list.
Someone should make a podcast about it.
Yeah.
Right. Christ.
I've
I
made that
mean,
joke before.
I don't want to just go. I mean,
No,
I
there's
just
a right
wanna-
answer.
I mean, I don't want to just go with the Matrix.
You could.
I mean,
You
That's
could.
the right answer.
Joey is very happy when people go with the
it's
Matrix.
so totally the Matrix.
Okay.
But like, there are so. Have you guys? I want to be on a certain episode. I want to be on the 13th floor really bad. Speaking of the
Ooh.
Matrix.
Well, our next
Uh-huh.
season's going to be horror, so we could maybe do
Probably
it.
fit that in.
Yeah, that
I just
falls
realized
in the.
also,
in
I think we could put Existence in there, right? Because I was talking about, yeah, that would work.
Montez wants to do that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this virus. I mean, this list is insane.
Yeah,
but yeah,
that's-
dude. I mean,
podcast.
you know, whatever. What comes? Is it okay to still like Fight Club? I know we were talking.
Yeah, sure.
about it.
We
I'm
like
just
Fight
kidding.
Club. It's in our.
That movie. Yeah, but
No,
like,
it's okay to like Fight Club, but people who like Fight Club are, don't be friends with them.
Joe, I think we should go back into the titles and indicate whether or not we liked the movies. And most of them, yeah, right? Like Fight Club, we had a lot of good.
Well, I
things to
have
say
all the
about.
movies. I have all my 1999 movies ranked. Like I have
Yeah.
a list, and like there's a real divide between the movies that I like, which is most of them, and the movies that I don't like, which is some of them.
Oh man, Dick. Dick is probably my favorite comedy of that year. I'll
Like,
tell you
hey,
that much.
This is
Second week in a
the
row.
31st movie we've covered, including all of the other reindeer, right? And I would say that I like, and by like I mean really like, 23 of 31.
That's a good average.
That's
very
very good.
good.
I really don't like 4, and then there's 4 others, including this one, that are kind of in the middle, along with John's beloved I'm So Sorry, episode 1. Like episode 1, Wild Wild West, Joan of Arc, and The Mummy all exist in this, like, I don't really like it, but I also don't dislike it. And then The Haunting, American Pie, American Beauty, and Boys Don't Cry are
Oh, The Haunting. I was thinking this might be my least favorite, like the movie, like the worst movie. But no, The Haunting. The Haunting is worse than this.
That's rough.
Haunting was
That
also
is-
expensive.
It had
Yes.
the same issues too, where it was like,
Exactly
you want to
the
make a
same.
different movie you're making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a bunch of different actors who are like, what movie are we in? Okay. Often in the
And-
same scene. It's a completely baffling movie. I have no
And a
idea how that movie
decapitation.
exists.
What is with
Where people
decapitations in
respond-
1999?
Respond incredibly inappropriately to the decapitation, and it is what a movie. What a movie that is. But that is our second ever and in a row. Someone saying Dick is one of their favorite 99 movies.
Now-
Have you guys done The Mummy yet?
Yes.
Oh, damn. Okay. I was going to say we should come back on for that.
We'll get there. Damn, we can have them on our version.
Yeah.
That-
I
Sure.
don't
No,
like
that
that
was-
movie. I don't think you want me on that.
Yeah,
But, you know.
I love it. Joey, it was by the time he saw it, the whole thing had been.
So
sort of
Joey, you don't want to come on
stale.
for the Mummy 3, like the Dragon King, or
Dragon
whatever it's
Emperor?
called?
Scorpion
It's
King?
called-
No,
No,
the
that's
Dragon
the whole
Emperor.
different-
That's
the
a
Dragon
different
Emperor is,
Jet
Well,
Li.
Jet Li, yeah.
Yeah,
and Michelle Yeoh's in it too. So
and
Interesting,
and a
interesting.
different actor playing Rachel Weisz. So,
yeah,
mhm.
playing the actual actress Rachel Weisz, someone else.
as the role that she's in.
All right, one more question. Mike, favorite movie? I think I might actually know both of your answers. Favorite movie of all time?
Oh, do you want to? Are you going to try and guess? Someone just asked me
No,
this
just-
recently. It hasn't changed since I was like fucking
Yeah, I think I know
13 years
Mike's.
old.
No, it's Planet of the Apes.
It's Planet of the Apes, the original.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's like a perfect film. It's amazing. Like the you want social commentary, you want horror, you want sci-fi, you want whatever. It's all there. It's science and religion. It's the Inherit the Wind with monkeys. Like what? And they're arguing. It's amazing. So,
I think it's a great movie. I love that movie. I loved it like growing up. What are your thoughts in relation to like the original of the new trilogy, which is like I think we all like
Mhm.
it's objectively awesome, but like
yeah.
how do you feel about it sort of within the Planet of the Apes like franchise?
I think it goes too hard, especially with the new third one. Like
Yeah.
it's all about like war
Yeah.
and drawing battle lines and all this, and it's like I kind of like how we skip all that and just flash forward to them running shit. I don't think the story is as interesting on how you get there as much as what you do with it once you got it. Like they run civilization. I want to see what they do with it. It's obvious they're going to win.
Mhm.
So like it felt like they were kind of going through a lot of motions, but the visual effects,
Yeah.
just that's why you watch it. That's why I ended up watching I like the second one the most. I have a little problems with Franco and the baby Caesar graphics looking back,
In the
but
first one.
in the first one,
Yeah.
yeah. And then we really can't mention the Tim Burton one at all. So
Man, I'd love to talk about that at some point. But no, I think War for the Planet of the Apes is like one of the best action movies I've ever seen in my life. Like it's so fucking good. But yeah, they're all three of that trilogy is like doing something kind of different and interesting. I actually like, I know people love the second one. That was my least favorite, but I still think it's great. Like, and it's just a really interesting and cool series. But like, that's a really good way. Like, it's a good example of how you can take a franchise and like do something interesting and different and like work within what exists to like make something that really is its own thing. I kind of agree that it goes too hard. Like, I know exactly what you mean, but like, that's kind of what it was doing, right? That was sort of like,
yeah,
that was the point, right? Like, we're gonna go hard. And
the original part 4 goes too far,
yeah,
in my opinion. Also, with its, I mean, it's just insane that part 4 of the original ones. But I think it works well, like you said, because they're filling in gaps. It's like what they do with Star Wars.
Yeah, it's like Filoni. It's like Filoniing. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not retelling anything. They're just keep putting you up to speed
Working
and all
on
that
margins.
kind of stuff.
Yep, I agree.
Right. Yeah.
Dan, favorite movie?
My favorite movie of all time is Back to the Future.
Yep.
3.
So the first one is my favorite movie of all time. It hit me at the right time as a teenager. It's a high school movie with science fiction. It's the reason I love time travel as an idea. It's got great music. To this day, I still love Huey Lewis and the News.
You like Huey Lewis and the News? Their early work was a little too new wave for my taste. But when sports came out in '83, I think they really came into their own.
And Alan Silvestri's score is unstoppable. But I will say this, that I do love all three. Mm-hmm. And the DeLorean in Part 3 is my favorite version of the DeLorean.
Yeah.
I love, and Mike and I talked about this on the podcast, that like I hadn't thought about it until I was preparing for Third Time's a Charm, that like the DeLorean itself has a sort of reverse character arc as Marty. It starts off brand new, clean, fresh, and then by the end it's falling apart and held together with like nuts and bolts and duct tape and shit.
It's pretty interesting.
And it dies, I love the journey of the DeLorean.
Joey, something interesting just happened.
What?
Well, so we've had a couple of repeat favorite 99 movies, a couple of matrices here and there. We've
asked a lot of people.
Our second Dick. We've asked a lot of people. That was the first time, and it's a much broader category. Obviously, there's a lot more options. But that was the first time that we've ever had somebody have the same favorite movie of all time. Not only that, but like without any hesitation or question. Like,
well, I mean, I didn't have to ask either of them what their favorite movie was because I just knew it. I also
that's Jen
think
Tisdale's favorite movie too, and she was just like, "Boom!"
I do think if you asked 100 people what their favorite movie was, I think probably 10 of them might say Back to the Future.
I think
what I mean. Like if you just like randomly, like, and I'm not saying that like as any kind of negative. I think it's a perfect movie, and I think it's just like it's one of those movies that like it's. We were talking about
10
this.
is way too many, Joey. But like you're right that it's significant.
No, but like I think I'm not saying I'm not saying 10% of people. I just think if you ask, it's more likely to be someone's favorite movie than most other movies. I think it's a movie that like plays well to people of any age.
Yeah.
It's
no matter when you saw it.
Yes,
it's a blockbuster. I mean, look, it's a safe choice for favorite movie of all time for sure. Is it the best movie I've ever seen? No, but it's the movie that like if it's my desert island movie. If I only get to watch one movie for the rest of my life, that's the movie I want to put on.
I'm trying to think who I'm more comfortable with, Luke kissing Leia or Marty kissing Luke.
Luke kissing Leia because like they don't know.
It's not an Oedipus thing. Yeah, he knows, right?
I will say that, so like Mike and I are both super old. I will say that it was one of the first 3 movies I remember watching in the theater.
I have vivid memories of seeing Back to the Future.
I remember, but Back to the Future is the one that I remember, like, what the theater looked like and, like, coming out of I remember a lot about the experience of watching that movie in the theater. That, Return of the Jedi, and E.T. are the three that, like, I
holy shit
distinctly remember seeing in the theater. Yeah.
So I know I went to E.T. For me, it was Ghostbusters, Jedi, and that.
So, I wasn't allowed to see Ghostbusters until later because it was too, there's some shit in that movie. But I saw it by the time I was like 6, but not like right when it came out. I had to wait a couple of years. But yeah, I never saw that in the theater, alas. That's a great movie. Anyways,
thank you both.
That's a nice way to end it.
Cool.
Yeah,
I'm glad that we finally talked about some movies that John could feel passionate about in this episode. It wasn't Wild Wild West, but it was.
I do feel passionate about Wild Wild West.
It's just passion on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, it's frustration, passion, and like
it's like that Passion of the Christ thing where he's nailed to the cross.
It's exactly
and
like that. It is like I was tortured within an inch of my life. That's the passion I feel for Wicky Wild West. Joey, I should do the preview, I guess, because this is your episode.
Yes.
So I should do the funny thing where I hint at what our next movie will be. And here's what I'll say. We may be able to redeem Kevin Kline in 2 weeks. So we'll be back with more Kevin Kline.
Oh, I think I know.
2 weeks from now.
Look out for frogs.
Look out for frogs. Thank you, guys.
Jim West, Desperado, Rough Rider. No, you don't want nada. None of this. 6 gunning this, brother running this. Buffalo Soldier. Look, it's like I told you. Any damsel that's in distress, be out of that dress when she meet Jim West. Roughneck, so go check the law on the buy. Watch your step will flex and get a hole in your side. Swallow your pride. Don't let your lip react. You don't want to see my hand where my hip be at. With Artemis from the start of this. Running the game. James West, taming the West. So remember the name. Now who you gonna call? Not the GB. Now who you gonna call? If you ever riff with either one of us, break out before you get bum rushed at the Wild Wild West. When I roll into the Wild Wild West. When I stroll into the Wild Wild West. When I bounce into the Wild Wild West.